Hello there, and welcome to Weird Music on the Glumberger channel. This is of course that show where each and every week we just take a different album and have a discussion of sorts about it, try to discuss what the heck is going on with it, but also what is it making me think about and feel and all that lot, right? So, in today's episode we have an album that I genuinely have no memory of how I came across. I generally spend a lot of my time just browsing through Bandcamp, Discogs, Wikipedia, other various websites and going down various rabbit holes of, artists, musicians, record labels, etc, etc. And somehow along the way, I came across an incredibly strange record label and an incredibly strange side project. And all in all, it's incredibly incomprehensible, but I thought it would be fun to try and talk about this album. So let's just crack on with it. Today I present Gayest by Two Dads, Two Sons emoji. So of course, let us ask ourselves, who is Two Dads, Two Sons emoji? Well, Two Dads, Two Sons emoji is one of a bunch of monikers for experimental musician Marsha Fisher from Minnesota. And so across her career, Fisher has released rather, sort of a plethora of very peculiar albums under her own name, under various other aliases across a whole host of record labels, including The Tapeworm, Orbs Tapes, and of course none other than Fault Records. Who I have to say, I do love seeing their many releases pop up whenever I least suspect it, especially when diving into these weird experimental artists. Fault is always there in the background. Anyway, speaking of record labels, Marsha Fisher is also responsible for the incredibly strange label Gay Hippe Vampire, described on her page as experimental music from Lincoln NE, mostly angry and probably queer. And so I have to say, this strange label seems to be an outlet for a bunch of Fisher's more experimental dirges into the world of experimental sound art, noise, and as well as being a platform for a number of rather unknown artists as well. Truly fascinating. And so in today's episode, we're taking into dive of one of Fisher's really weird projects, with a look at Two Dads, Two Sons emoji album, Gayest. An album I believe was actually the debut for this particular moniker, which was also released on cassette through Gay Hippe Vampire. And so of course, this is an incredibly bizarre album, not just from how it sounds, but from the project name consisting of just a single emoji. And the music, well, it's just an overwhelming bombardment of caustic noise, it feels. All in all, incredibly difficult to digest, and it's an album that clearly doesn't care for rules and conventions, right? And even within the noise genre, there's something oddly interesting and engrossing about this particular kind of record, which I'll do my best to try and discuss, so let's discuss the album, shall we? So, Gayest by Two Dads, Two Sons emoji, maybe we just shorten this to Two Dads, whatever. This album opens up with the track Weird Around Women. And so from the onset, it's kind of difficult to really discern what one would be getting themselves in for. From the name alone, you might imagine some sort of hyperpop sensibility, but of course, as we can no doubt tell, it's not the case at all. Immediately when this song starts, you're bombarded with very peculiar and rather unsettling noise palette, dominated by the swirling drone of almost distorted electronics, whilst the twinkling of some kind of object just hovers over the rest of it. Before it's then just joined by the repeating looping sample of a voice asking us what it means, or at least I think so. And from this, you might have imagined that we'd be getting ourselves in for the kind of record one would expect for the likes of Fault Records, or even the strange Malt Fluid. And I don't know whether the video is out on that one, but we will be diving into Malt Fluid at some point. In any case, this album, it then becomes an odd and jarring surprise when we're suddenly bombarded with incredibly janky overloading noises that become really incomprehensible and horribly noisy. And so this is perhaps the true presentation of this kind of record. Noise. Now, noise is something we have explored a bit of in the history of weird music. And although they always leave me feeling completely overloaded and at loss for words, I do find these kinds of albums really weird and fascinating. And to be fairness to Two Dads, Two Sons, the actual tone of the noise becomes oddly pleasant after their initial harshness and starts to subside into the background, if that makes sense. It leaves you with an overloading tone, but there's something wholly odd and bizarre, but kind of fun about it. With the whole record having this fun sensibility running throughout it, that makes it oddly interesting. And it's almost as though everything has been done to present this as something else other than a bombarding noise record, which is perhaps the very point. Something we'll discuss a little bit later on, I feel. Anyway, side A of this album continues with the next track of No God, No Buddha. And so much like the preceding track, this is another onslaught of noise, opening up with a terrifying crash into the horrifying soundscape. And it feels like an overload of stimulus coming in from all around you, sounding so harsh as those high-pitched, distorted drones just dig deeper and deeper into your very brain itself, excavating the very layers themselves and leaving behind a wake of destruction behind it. And alongside those tones, that just seems to stab and stab with a visceral presence, I might add, is the appearance of these incredibly processed vocals, sounding pressed up right against the microphone, and then just mixed to hell it feels, and it then morphs into this very peculiar pattern of noise tones where it feels like there's slight discernible details going on, but it's also clouded and distorted amongst the mess of constantly building layers. But the more you listen to this one, the more you can kind of see this semblance of structure almost, and oddly enough, it feels like a pop song in terms of that structure, but one from the very depths of hell itself, distorted beyond comprehension, and yet still following along to some of those forms and conventions, albeit in a noisy, unapproachable way. And then, in a weird way, kind of like the previous track, just as it feels like your brain just ends up accepting its fate, it then just floats along the very album experience, though, just letting those noisy, distorted drones just occupy the background of your hearing as you just plod along and get on with it, basically. Overloading, but once again, weirdly fascinating and, for some weird reason. So, that finishes side A of the album, and then we then open up side B with the next track of Die. D-Y-E. Now, this is another overloading, distorted, low-resolution, intense-sounding drone, of course, that is in amongst the hot, noisy, within those noisy, dirty, horrible layers, sounds glorious, I would say. It's weird, but within that horrible caustic mix, it feels like one of those drones is just reaching up and up and up, just ascending to such great heights. And that is because, until it becomes bombarded with the layering of noise again. In this one, it feels like, there's a lot of microphone interference, including breathing right into it, I think, which is what it sounds like to me. Really weird. But for some reason, this particular noise just works in context of this particular album, though. Bizarre, but that onslaught, the chaos, the intense noise itself, it's the very album experience being presented to us. And it's difficult to comprehend, but I genuinely find myself at loss for words. Because my brain, it hears this stuff, and then it's just like, well, I don't know what's going on, and it just gives up, basically. But you then still follow along to it, just by listening to it. It's just I find that so fascinating, the process of the brain trying to understand music. Moving along. We get the next track of Harder, Deeper Web, which is another sort of low-resolution distorted drone of sorts, sounding sourced from machinery of some kind, maybe? Or maybe just being some kind of vehicle on the fast roads, just hearing the engine churning and churning away. Maybe it's the sound of a vacuum cleaner, though. Who knows? Is the vacuum cleaner an instrument, actually? Who knows? It is. But oddly enough, this is perhaps the perfect time to bring up this sort of comparison I got when hearing this particular track. Because when I was hearing, this album, and especially this track, I was being reminded a lot of the album Fingering by Christophe Mignot, which is an album we've discussed before. But in particular, I was reminded a lot of the album's track 5, I think it is, Board Heat, which is the track of a Talks to Washboard Heater. And that is, that single gentle droning track provides a nice moment of respite across that incredibly bizarre and incomprehensible album. And a lot of elements from this very album kind of remind me of a similar kind of sensibility of an approach to musical composition of sorts. And I don't know exactly where these sound sources are being originate from, but there's definitely remind me of some kind of similar approach, kind of machines or appliances, basically, just rumbling and droning away as their motors turn and turn with the formless chaos, essentially. And it wouldn't surprise me if some of the sounds have been sourced from this kind of experimental approach. It kind of suggests it more to me when entering the sort of end to this one, where you sort of get a lot of air hitting the microphone, suggesting the idea of sort of standing outside and sourcing sources of sounds from just the everyday world itself. So there's one more track on this album, our title track of Gayest. And so after everything we've gone through, this onslaught of overwhelming noise and chaos, this track is a lovely moment of respite that continues the conventions of distorted noise and drones. However, it feels like this one's also accompanied by the sounds of gentle vaporwave drones. And it creates such an odd dual concept of delightful tones and horrible tones, both at war with each other, fighting for this dominant space within the composition before it draws itself to its close. And considering the very structure of this album, I think it's kind of an interesting way to end everything, which gives us an oddly, delightful moment, but one that's still really uncomfortable and in keeping with the entire album's presentation of noise with an odd sense of structure. Really, really weird. And so essentially, we have covered Gayest by Two Dads, Two Sons emoji. First off, what an incredibly weird record we have here. And as mentioned, the world of noise records is, nothing new to me, but what fascinates me is how Fisher has presented this chaotic noise album, in an incredibly queer aesthetic, I might add, as well. From the name, of course, to some hints in the track names, to even the somewhat over-the-top faux cutesy pink album cover. This album just presents unbridled noise in such a wonderfully queer fashion. And I have to say, I really enjoy experimental albums like this, one that feels completely untethered to any sort of convention or binary norm, as one might put it. And instead, it just freely explores abstract notions through the use of noise itself. It's weirdly both an uncomfortable listening experience, and at times an oddly enjoyable one that makes you feel a little bit comforted in a weird way. And to be fair, with how little information has been presented to us on this particular record, it's perhaps impossible to truly discern the motives and intent behind this particular record. Maybe, it's just Fisher having fun making noise, which is also pretty cool, I think. I should also mention, though, that there's a whole world of, just music to be discovered, through Fisher herself, though. There's so many different aliases and stuff. Released music under her own name, to albums under the monikers of Crustacean Nation, which is a side project with another collaborator, I think, which is a brilliant name, I have to say. But also projects like Sea Hearse, Wicked Piss, and then, of course, the very emoji-led moniker we've been exploring today. All of it just results in this incredibly eclectic discography that seems to just hold up a middle finger to even the rules of experimentalism in favour of just exploring whatever sounds you bloody well feel like exploring, because it's what you want to do yourself. And the result? Bafflement, confusion, but just this weird sense of just having fun at the same time. I think it's very cool. And so, I think with that, we're going to be coming to the end of our episode of Weird Music. Very weird place to start with Martha Fisher's work, I have to admit. Maybe not the best place to start, but I just can't deny the odd amount of fun that this kind of record offers, to be fair. And there's something just amusing about the whole moniker, just the emoji for Two Dads, Two Sons. But I think Fisher utilises it in a weird and interesting way, to be fair. At some point we might have to explore the sonic worlds of Fisher and their rather extensive discography. Maybe even dive a little bit more into Gay Hippe Vampire and their unclassifiable releases, essentially. In any case, though, I'm glad to have talked about, both this very little weird album and, Fisher herself, an incredible experimental musician who's just doing their own thing, essentially. In any case, hope you've enjoyed this episode of Weird Music. There's links to the album, to Gay Hippe Vampires, other works by Martha Fisher, all in the description, so just go check it out, why not, Just, if it's something that will interest you, of course, very weird, but weirdly fun. In any case, I wish you all the best, hope you take care, and bye-bye for now. Bye-bye.
What does the dream say?